The house was too quiet. Sarah Whitmore sat on the edge of the bed, her gaze locked on the tiny pair of socks resting in her palms. They were soft, yet they felt like lead, pulling her hands down toward the floor. This was the third time the nursery had remained empty. She tried to fold them, but her fingers trembled, forcing her to grip the fabric until her knuckles turned white. She looked around the room. The silence in the hallway felt heavy, pressing against the walls like a physical weight that refused to lift. Every corner of the space was filled with the absence of what should have been there. She shifted, the mattress springs groaning under her slight movement, but the sound died instantly, swallowed by the thick, stagnant air. She stared at the bare floorboards, listening to the house settle, waiting for a sound that never came. The nursery was a vacuum, pulling the warmth from the room and leaving only the cold reality of another empty cycle. Sarah held the socks tight, her breath hitching in the stillness, as the weight of the silence became the only thing she could feel. Across the room, Daniel stood by the window, his back a rigid line against the fading light. He watched the streetlights flicker on outside, one by one, counting them to keep his mind from drifting back to the empty crib. He gripped the windowsill until the wood bit into his palms, his knuckles aching with the effort of staying upright. The silence between them was not empty. It was a wall. Sarah finally shifted, her movement sharp and sudden in the stillness. "I do not understand," she whispered. The words were thin, barely audible, yet they cut through the room like a blade. Her voice cracked, hitting the bare floorboards and echoing back at them, hollow and accusing. She looked up, her eyes searching the shadows. "What did I do wrong?" She waited, her breath hitching in her chest. Daniel did not turn around immediately. He finally turned, his face obscured by the gloom, and saw her waiting for a truth he could not give. Daniel forced his gaze away from the window, his movements stiff. "You did not do anything wrong," he said. The words were flat, stripped of any real conviction, hanging in the air like dust. Sarah let out a sound that was not quite a laugh, a jagged, broken thing that tore through the quiet. It ended in a sharp, painful intake of breath as she stared at the wall. "3 times, Daniel," she said, her voice trembling. "3 times we prepared. 3 times we waited for a life that never came." The reality of their cycle settled over them, heavy and suffocating. She looked down at the tiny socks still clutched in her hand. The fabric felt like a burden she could no longer carry. With a sudden, violent motion, she dropped them. They hit the duvet with a soft, final thud that seemed to echo through the entire house. The room felt colder now, the air turning stagnant and biting. Shadows stretched across the floor, swallowing the remaining light. Hours bled into one another, the sun dipping low until the room surrendered to deep, encroaching shadows. The air remained thick, stagnant, and heavy with the weight of their shared failure. Daniel stood up. He began to pace the length of the floor, his footsteps rhythmic and sharp against the wood, a frantic metronome in the gloom. Each pass took him closer to the door, then back to the edge of the bed. He stopped near the frame, his hand resting firmly on the wood, anchoring himself. He turned his head, his profile barely visible in the fading light. "There are children out there who need a home," he said. The sentence was steady, a clear, sharp line cutting through the suffocating dark. Sarah looked up, her movements slow and deliberate. Her eyes were rimmed with red, the skin around them tight, but she held his gaze with a sudden, piercing intensity. "Adoption?" she asked. The word left her lips and hung in the air, fragile, trembling, and entirely uncertain. The silence was no longer heavy, but a breathless, suspended moment. Daniel nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement that broke the tension. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed beside her. The space between them, once a vast, cold chasm, narrowed as he shifted his weight. Sarah turned her head, her gaze drifting to the empty corner. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the bedspread, tracing the fabric as if grounding herself in the present. She looked back at him, her expression softening. "Let us do it," she whispered. The words were quiet, barely audible. In the stillness of the room, the vow settled over them. They sat together, no longer staring into the past, but facing the quiet, open space of a future.